Shalom and welcome. Shalom and welcome to Congregation Lador Vador. I am Rabbi Stephen Moskowitz, and I am so pleased that you have joined us for this special occasion when we will dedicate Annie's Garden in memory of Annie Bleiberg, a longtime member of our synagogue community. I wish to acknowledge a number of people before I share some remembrances of Annie. First of all, I'm pleased to lead this dedication ceremony with our Cantor, Talya Smilowitz, who will share the extraordinary gift of her voice to mark this milestone in our congregation's history. Our president, Brian Land, had every intention of being here this morning, but unfortunately, he just came down with COVID, so he sends his regrets. I know how pleased he is that we have added Annie's Garden to our landscape. We are also grateful to our Board of Trustees for their unwavering support. Our congregation's Enrichment Committee, chaired by Ginny Kunkin and Judy Tantliff, were instrumental in building this garden. They have been planning this beautiful garden for years. Susanne Seperson, a member of the community and Annie's daughter, will share some remarks later in the program. All of the committee members deserve our thanks and praise. Thank you to Roz Blumenthal, Robin Charlo, Nomi Glazer, Marcia Glick, Judy Hirschon, Susan Holtzman, Eileen Lambden, and Bonnie Schnagel. And thank you to Stephen Holtzman, whose gardening expertise helped the committee to realize its vision. I would also like to acknowledge two guests whose presence helps to elevate this occasion: Josh Lafazin, a Nassau County legislator, and Andrea Bolander, the chair of the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County. Annie was a longtime supporter of the center and shared her story with many of the memorial's visitors. I had the privilege of serving as Annie's rabbi for almost 18 years. It was one of my greatest honors that she chose to call me rabbi. Hearing someone who has lived through the history that I only study and teach feels especially weighty. And sometimes when I'm reading and learning about the Shoah, I can still hear Annie's voice in my ears. I can still hear the words she would offer to our students when she came every year to our sixth grade class to speak about how she survived the Holocaust. I recall how she would tell them how her life was similar to theirs before the Nazis invaded her native Poland. I remember many things, but a few notes from her story are deserving of mention. She told the students how when she and her family were crammed into a train car heading for a death camp, her father managed to pry open the small window with the tools he had smuggled onto the train. Men and boys squeezed through the opening and jumped first, and then it was the women's and girls' turn. The last boy became scared, and so Annie, who was to be the first girl, jumped in his stead, and then he after her. By then, the guards on top of the train discovered what they were doing and shot and killed the boy when he jumped. Annie's last memories of her mother and sister who were murdered in that death camp is saying goodbye to her sister in that cramped train car and the feeling of her mother's hands pushing her from behind to help her squeeze through the window. She never saw them again. Only she and her father managed to survive. Still, even after her many attempts to avoid capture, the Nazis did manage to find her when a former classmate identified her as a Jew. And yet she would emphasize to the students, not that neighbor who turned her in, but all the other people who hid her or gave her a morsel of food or offered her a warm bath when she was on the run. There were good people, she would say, who helped her survive. She spent nearly 1.5 years in concentration camps, and she would try to convey to our students how terrible the experience of the camps was. She was always hungry. She became weak and emaciated. And then she would often tell the students how she and 3 other girls would share their daily rations. They would use one of their tea rations, or what she would tell them was like dirty water, to color their cheeks. That way they would not look as pale as they actually were. And looking healthier meant one more day of life. And then she would often point her finger and say, "Living is always worth it. No matter how bad things seem, life is precious." And then she would conclude her story by saying, "Am Yisrael Chai," the people of Israel lives. We would then give the students an opportunity to talk about what they heard and to come up to Annie and ask her questions one-on-one. And they would often want to see her number up close, 38330. And some would want to touch her arm and feel the tattoo, and she would let them. She never covered her number up. She wanted the world to see it. Her arm served as testimony against the Nazis and the evil they perpetrated, but also, of course, as witness to her survival. And I would often drive her home after the Hebrew school concluded, and in the car, she would talk about what she had just shared. And I had this sense that telling her story was both simultaneously invigorating and exhausting. She would often say, "You know, Rabbi, I leave out some of the details when talking to such young students." And I remember thinking, there were worse moments than jumping off a moving train on a snowy winter night. There were worse moments than drinking dirty water tea and eating half a slice of bread every day. And on one occasion, she told me the following: "We used to have to squat to go to the bathroom at the edge of these latrine pits. And sometimes people were so weak they fell in and drowned in those pits. And on other occasions, the Nazi guards would push them into those pits, and they would drown. And even going to the bathroom was dangerous. In the camps, even the most mundane and basic of human things could mean death. The Nazis robbed Jews of their humanity. And I cannot explain why this is the memory I can never forget. Perhaps it was because I had this feeling that Annie needed to share it and speaking it out loud, but she also felt she could not tell such a horror to our young students. She wanted them to remain hopeful. Her goal when telling our students was to instill hope. And even in the midst of sharing the terrors she experienced, she wanted to protect our children and our students. She did not want them only to see anti-Semitism and death. She wanted them to see survival and life. And Annie did survive. She married and had a daughter. She celebrated the B'nai Mitzvah of grandchildren as well as weddings. She was present for the birth of great-grandchildren. And she wanted our students to remember the Nazi evils, but also see survival and hope. And that, of course, is the point of our garden, so aptly named Annie's Garden. In the winter, there will be barren trees and bushes, and its cold stone benches. And I will then imagine her tumbling in the snowbank when Annie tried to evade her Nazi tormentors. And then every year, at around this time, its bushes will start filling with color, and its flowers will start blooming. and I will recall her concluding message of hope and her words, "Life is always worth it. Am Yisrael Chai." It's my pleasure now to call forward Lisa Mintz-Land, who will offer her husband Brian Land's words.
Welcome to Congregation L'Dor V'Dor and the dedication of the Annie Bleiberg Memorial Garden. Before I give my brief remarks, let me begin by thanking the entire Enrichment Committee, our clergy, our board, and lastly, Annie's daughter, Susanne, and the family without whom this day wouldn't be possible. As I have learned by attending more funerals than I care to, one of the last things that they say at each funeral is, "May her memory be a blessing." By each of your deeds today, we will have made Annie's memory a further blessing. Today, as I think of Annie, the Holocaust, and this small but magnificent garden, I can't help but think about dirt. One might ask, why dirt? What is the connection? Let me begin with the explanation of dirt because I believe it is to be important. The stuff we call dirt, more formally soil, is made up of two distinct types of material: minerals, the main ingredient, and organic matter, that is, living things and their decaying remains. The Holocaust was dirt. It overtook us. It overwhelmed us. It was as dark could get, dark as the soil and mulch we see before us today, and sadly, it left behind for us far too many living things and their decaying remains. But why do I think of this dirt today? Because without dirt, sadly, there are no gardens. Without this dirt, the flower, the small but effervescent and strong flower that Annie became, couldn't grow. This dirt that I call the Holocaust took so much from Annie, her family, and all those who suffered through it but survived, also inexorably shaped the girl, woman, mother, and passionate advocate that Annie became. No one can understand why God allows people to create atrocities such as the Holocaust, or the goings-on today in the Ukraine, or the hundreds of other wars that we have seen in our lives. But I believe this small yet strong, vital, effervescent, and full of life woman and flower that Annie became, the same woman who shined a bright and warm light on the darkness and dirt that was the Holocaust, on her family, and all of the lives she touched in some way, was made stronger and better for her experience in the Holocaust. For without having gone through it, she could never have been the beacon before us, all to remind us of our past and what could be our future if we aren't careful. Why God chooses these people, no one knows. God chose Moses to suffer, to lead us. God chose many to suffer to help us. God chose Annie, and thank God this young teenager had the strength and fortitude and courage to survive, thrive, and never stop speaking out about the atrocities she saw and lived through. So today, when you look at this small and magnificent garden and reflect, it is Annie that you're looking at. It is made of the remains of living things like dirt, the darkness that was the Holocaust, and the dirt before you that she suffered through. It is also the glorious life in the bright and beautiful flowers and bushes that needed dirt to form and bloom, to remind us that without darkness there is no light. And no light shined brighter than Annie when she spoke so strongly, so forcefully about her past. Remember now and always, Annie was chosen by God to suffer and chosen by God to survive, to remind us to never forget the darkness, but always know from darkness comes light. That was Annie. Her life was a blessing. May her memory be a blessing, and now may we consecrate this garden to be a place of peace and tranquility and a reflection of Annie for all who come to visit it. Thank you again for all who helped make this day possible. This is who we all are at Congregation L'Dor V'Dor, and this is who you are.
Our cantor will now lead us in a beautiful Yiddish song, Tumba Lalaika. The words are in that white handout if you'd like to join with her and raise your voices in song.
Tumbala, tumbala, tumbala laika, tumbala, tumbala, tumbala laika, tumbala laika, spielbala laika, tumbala laika, Freilach soll sein. Steht a Bocher und tracht und tracht a ganze Nacht. Wemmen zu nehmen und nicht verschämen, wemmen zu nehmen und nicht verschämen. Tumbala, tumbala, tumbala laika, tumbala, tumbala, tumbala laika, tumbala laika, spielbala laika, tumbala laika, Freilach soll sein. Mädel, Mädel, ich will bei dir fragen, was kann wachsen ohne Regen, was kann brennen und nicht aufhören, was kann bänken, weinen und tränen. Tumbala, tumbala, tumbala laika, tumbala, tumbala, tumbala laika, tumbala laika, spielbala laika, tumbala laika, Freilach soll sein. Narischer Bocher, was darf zu fragen, a Stein kann wachsen ohne Regen, Liebe kann brennen und nicht aufhören, a Herz kann bänken, weinen und tränen. Tumbala, tumbala, tumbala laika, tumbala, tumbala, tumbala laika, tumbala laika, spielbala laika, tumbala laika, Freilach soll sein. Tumbala laika, spielbala laika, tumbala laika, Freilach soll sein.
It's my honor and privilege to call Susanne Bleiberg Seperson forward to share some remarks. She's, of course, Annie's daughter and our friend at the congregation. Yeah, sure.
First, thank you all for coming to dedicate this beautiful garden, Annie's Garden, at Congregation Lador Vador. Second, I've learned so much that I didn't already know. First, never speak after the rabbi. As well as some little stories about my mother. Today's a very special day, and I know that my mother would be very, very happy that you came to honor her, to remember her and her accomplishments. You know, she once asked me, "Who will remember me?" And I answered, "Mom, anyone who has ever heard you speak will remember you." And she spoke literally to thousands of people, old, young, Jewish, non-Jewish, students, teachers, military personnel, people from all walks of life throughout the world. We're remembering her today in the most wonderful way, and as you've heard, I want to thank the leadership, Ginny Kunkin and Judy Tantliff, and the entire committee for creating this garden. They planted the seed for a living memorial, and together with the members of the committee and all of you, their idea came to fruition. We are so grateful and honored. Although I'd like to acknowledge each of you by name, time does not permit, and I hope if we've left your name off the list of supporters in the program, I apologize. Our office staff also came down with COVID, so things were not exactly the way we wanted. And once again, Sue and Steve Holtzman, your horticultural accomplishments are now legendary. So thank you. And of course, the rabbi, the cantor, the board, thank you all. And I especially want to acknowledge two people, the director of the Holocaust Center Memorial, Holocaust Memorial, and the Tolerance Center in Glen Cove, Andrea Bolender, and the former Director of Education, Helen Turner, who flew in from St. Louis, and I can't thank you enough. So I'm afraid that a good story, well, sometimes you have to hear it twice because there is overlap. Okay, so as many of you know, my mother was a survivor of the Auschwitz concentration camp. At the entrance of the camp, there was a selection. Prisoners were sent either to the right or to the left. To the right meant life, the opportunity to work, and perhaps survive. To the left meant immediate death. The memorial stone is located on the right, and there's a butterfly on the stone. At her unveiling, which some of you may remember, a butterfly appeared during the prayers, and it flew around the footstones in circles several times until the end of the prayers. I know others took this as a sign that she was watching over us, and so there is a butterfly on the stone so that she may look over all of us and Congregation Lador Vador. My mother was a very powerful speaker. You could hear a pin drop whether there were 20 people in the room or 1,000, and there were. As she related her life story and the hardships she endured, she always said that she was lucky. Lucky, after everything she went through. She had a saying in German, man muss aushalten, überhalten und durchhalten, which in translation means something like one has to outlast, overcome, and persevere through the hard times. Everyone in life has some hardships. But after listening to her, students would write saying how she had given them hope. If she could endure what she had gone through, then surely they could too. And as she related to the young people about her life before, during, and after the war, beginning with her school experiences, she had them in the palm of her hand as they waited with bated breath to find out how she survived. And so she would begin by saying, I grew up in a middle-class family in a small town, Oleszyce, Poland, and had a younger sister, Helen, and many cousins and relatives living near us. As a young girl, I played with dolls with my girlfriends. In the summer, we played by the river, and in the winter, we would ice skate and go sleigh riding. I loved school and was a very good student, and my parents and sister and I had friends who were Jewish and non-Jewish. School was only mandatory until 8th grade. High school was private and expensive and not considered so important for a girl. So I was lucky to be able to go to high school. We lived in a bigger city by that time, Yaroslav, where there were high schools. Yet all the Jewish children had to sit in a separate row. But my parents believed in education. They said my education would be my dowry, and they were right. I quote her, and this is from her talks. Anti-Semitism has existed for centuries all over the world, even before the infamous Holocaust era, flaring up at different times, in different places, and to different degrees. In 1937-38, anti-Semitism raised its ugly head. In Poland, once again, it was seen and felt almost everywhere, in schools, in offices, in factories, on streets. In my city, Yaroslav, and my high school, they were no exception. Many neighborhoods became unsafe for Jews. If a Jew was out in the evening after dark, he was beaten, pulled by his beard, and mugged. Jewish stores were boycotted with signs at the entrance, "Don't buy from a Jew." The gymnasiums, or high schools, and universities became battlegrounds for the Jewish and Gentile students. What may surprise you is that the fights were fueled by the faculty. In my high school, in conjunction with a discussion of the novel Lalka, the doll, written in 1890 by a Polish journalist and novelist Bolesław Prus, even the professor fomented anti-Semitism. The subject was a comparison of Jewish life in Warsaw to the end of the 19th century and now, before the outbreak of World War II. The discussion took place one period before my class and had turned into a shouting match and fistfight among the student body. When the same professor, Dr. Stanislaw Flajezak, who was everyone's favorite professor of history and literature, came to our class, he expressed his desire not to avoid a repetition of the troublesome situation that had taken place just 1 hour earlier. He said that, in order to keep peace and harmony in the class, he would give a very brief review of Jewish life and Jews' role at the present time, and ended with, and I quote, "We students and faculty can't solve the Jewish problem. There are higher authorities who think about this. I, for one, would suggest that Poland shall do with the Jews what Brazil does with coffee. Just dump them in the ocean." Yes, it was a great shock and disappointment to hear such a statement from him. It caused an uproar in the classroom, which spread to the halls of the school, but no formal charges or even complaints were brought against the professor. There was no one to take them to and nowhere to go. And then everything changed for the worse, because on September 1st, 1939, Hitler invaded Poland and the war began. Most of the Jews of Yaroslav were taken to Siberia. At the time, Annie's parents felt lucky because they were able to escape back to their small town of Oleszyce, and they stayed at her grandfather Michael's house. My mother always worried that a change in government could allow for anti-Semitism to reappear here. And I would answer in an exasperated way, "Oh, Ma, this is the United States. It can't happen here." Now I'm not so sure. I don't know what can and can't happen anymore. I can only say that as I get older, she gets smarter. I will share the next part of her story. Annie and her family were only able to remain in her grandfather's house in Oleshitsa for a few months. Soon her family, along with all the other Jews in the area, were forced to leave their homes and enter the ghetto Lubachov. And then when the ghetto was liquidated in January 1943, this is the repetition, the people were put onto cattle cars, packed tight, and taken to Belzec. Belzec was not a work camp, it was a death camp. In the history of Belzec, it is believed that only 2 Jewish men survived. So how did my mother and her father survive? Many people said that the Jews were like sheep and led to their slaughter. This is not true, not for everyone. They knew where they were going, and my grandfather Isaac, Annie's father, had taken some tools with him. As the train was moving, he, along with others, pried off one of the boards covering a window. They planned to jump off the moving train, despite hearing Nazi guards shooting anyone who tried to escape. The last contact Annie had with her mother was feeling her mother's hands on her behind, helping push her to the top of the window, which was high up. She remembered her father's instructions to roll out like a cat into the snowbank. The men and the boys went first, and Annie was next in line. The last boy got scared and said to my mother, "You go, I'll go after you." She jumped and survived. He jumped and was immediately shot to death. She never saw her mother or sister again. Annie and her family had made an agreement that if anyone survived the jump, they were to walk in the opposite direction of the train and go back to the ghetto where they had created a hiding spot in the attic. Sitting in the dark attic with her heart pounding, she heard footsteps of soldiers approaching, looking for any Jews remaining in the ghetto. Luckily, one soldier said to the other, "We don't have to look here. I evacuated everyone yesterday." Then, under the cover of darkness, she walked from the ghetto Lubachov back to Oleshitsa, where a Gentile family, the Kozhis, and until another friend, Vitold Mochak, the mayor's son, was able to secure false identity papers for her. Unfortunately, on the train to Germany, trying to pass as a Polish peasant girl, hoping to work there for the duration of the war, Annie was betrayed by a former high school classmate, thrown off the train and taken by the police to the Gestapo and then to the OD, Ordnungsdienst, the Jewish police jail inside the Krakow ghetto. Yet she would say she was still lucky, because had this happened closer to her hometown, she would have been shot immediately. Since this happened closer to Krakow, she was, quote, only beaten and taken to the jail in the Jewish ghetto, but she was still alive. Then when the Krakow ghetto was liquidated in 1943, Annie was taken to the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp. Again, she was lucky. Instead of being to the left and gassed to death immediately, she was selected for a work detail and sent to the right. She was tattooed with the number 38330 and a green inverted triangle, signifying that she was a Jew and a criminal, since she had already tried to escape. In the beginning, she did backbreaking work, cutting stones and building latrines. She would not have lasted too long, but once again, she was lucky. She was taken to the section known as Canada, where she sorted prisoners' goods to be sent to Germany, and which was indoors, so she was spared some of the effects of the harsh cold weather. The winters of 1942 and 43 were brutal. Again, she was lucky. The SS Frau in charge, on occasion, kept her Jewish workers, my mother among them, out all night when she knew that a selection was going to take place the next day. She faced daily horrors and threats. Oh, yeah. Sorry. She faced a cousin who can't come, who got lost. Again, she was lucky. She faced daily horrors and threats to her life as she witnessed the flames of the crematoria spew human remains. Yet she was able to retain her humanity as she and 2 other girls shared their meager rations, drinking 2 of the cups of coffee or tea and sharing the third to paint their cheeks, trying to look healthier. And when the Nazis knew that they were losing the war and made attempts to cover their tracks, they started to destroy the crematoria and move prisoners out of the camps. She was a prisoner in Auschwitz-Birkenau from March 43 until October, when Auschwitz was starting to be liquidated. That is how my mother left Auschwitz to be taken to a work camp in Czechoslovakia, Marisch-Weißwasser, from which she was finally liberated by Russian soldiers at the war's end in April 1945. On April 7, 1946, she married my father, David Bleiberg, whom she had known before the war because their mothers were friends. They were in Germany as stateless people and had originally planned to move to Israel. However, in Germany, Annie's luck almost ran out. My mother was hit by a truck, and she developed amnesia. With my father's help, she recovered her memory, but the war going on in Israel in 1950, they decided to come to the United States, where both had family. In the interim, she gave birth to me, her only child, in Germany, and ultimately became the very proud mother-in-law of Bob, grandmother of Lisa, David, and Stephen, and the very, very proud grandmother of Jeffrey, Sarah, and Jeremy, to be followed by Aubrey and Alana, who are named after her. Permit me to digress, if only for a moment. Today we are honoring my mother, Annie Bleiberg, and I've shared with you bits of her experience. There is a summary in her biography in the program, but I want to say a few words about my father, David Bleiberg. I did not learn my mother's entire story until the Holocaust Museum opened in Washington, D.C. Survivors were told to get on with their lives, not to look back. She was told to not even speak to me in German, which was my first language. But my father, his brother Oscar, and their friends who also survived would often talk about their experiences, their war stories. But unlike concentration camp survivors who were seen as victims, my father escaped from the Yanovska work camp in Lvov, now in Ukraine, and was active in the underground. He was like a Superman hero to me. He was taken to the work camp and somehow got word to his mother to bring him a clean shirt. She bribed the guard and gave him the shirt, which, with his bare hands, he used to twist the iron bars loose from the cell window. He jumped out the window and escaped from his cell, never to be captured again. He spent the war hiding in the woods and working against the Nazi onslaught. He could not have survived without the help of Polish friends. It is said that opposites attract, and growing up, my mother was the serious one, and my father was able to be lighthearted. He loved to tell jokes, sing, dance, and I remember most of all, as a very young child, he would play silly games with me. He was athletic, played soccer, rode horses, and passed his love of swimming on to me. There is so much more that can be said, but that will wait for another time. Sadly, he died at age 62 of pancreatic cancer. I was very glad that they were able to travel to Israel, which meant so much to both of them. After 50 years, Annie returned to Oleszyce, Poland, and found two people who had helped her, her father and my father, survive, Helka Fietowska-Piestrak and Witold Monczak, who, thanks to Annie's efforts, are now listed as righteous Christians at Yad Vashem. In many ways, Annie was ahead of her time. She had all the skills expected of a Jewish balabusta, renowned for her gefilte fish and babka, cooking, baking, sewing, knitting, crocheting, and entertaining. But she was also a controller of a major manufacturing company in New York City. In addition, she was an active member and then president of various Jewish charitable organizations, including her Temple Sisterhood and Netanya chapter of Women's League for Israel, and was a docent at the Nassau County Holocaust Museum and Tolerance Center, where she felt so at home. At many of her talks, she would say, "Why did I survive? I don't know. I was just lucky." But I have to speak for those who did not survive, especially for the little innocent children, 1.5 million Jewish children, her little 2-year-old cousin, Nisela Spatz, among them, who were brutally murdered in the crematoria, whose only crime was to be born to a Jewish family. And so she would tell her audiences that only with education and never forgetting what had happened could there be any hope of such terrible anti-Semitism not occurring again. It is up to each of us to find the courage to not be a bystander, to speak up when we see perpetrators, governments, and individuals create victims out of innocent people. Due to the limit of time, I will only say that the US government and many world leaders knew exactly what was happening during the Holocaust. Anti-Semitism was rife in the US and throughout the world. No one wanted to admit Jews to their country when Jews could still have been saved. We only need to look at the events of the Evian Conference in 1938, the anti-Semitism of Under-Secretary of State Breckinridge Long, and the failure of the US Senate to admit 20,000 Jewish refugee children, despite the strong effort of Eleanor Roosevelt. I hope we will enjoy the garden and remember Annie Bleiberg as a role model, a vibrant, outspoken, very intelligent individual who gave back to the community, espousing the values that she had learned at home. She'd been taught and learned that all people have dignity, that you must give respect and earn respect, and most of all, growing up in a Zionist family, that had there been a state of Israel before 1948, so many more people could have survived and thrived. She prayed for a strong United States and Israel, for peace and understanding among all. Those of you who knew Annie Bleiberg knew how happy she would be with this great honor. This tribute is so perfect. She loved plants, she loved people, she loved life, And I know that this garden will be enjoyed by the children of the Hebrew school before and after class, by our members on the high holidays wanting to contemplate in a natural setting, by all of us at outdoor services, and those just passing by who might note the dedication. She shared her story and inspired hope. We can say with gratitude that she was among us. I invite you to the social hall after we go outside to the garden to hear part of her powerful last presentation arranged by a middle school teacher, Mary Hovey of Joaquin, Texas, as reported in a newscast from station KTBS, an ABC affiliate in Louisiana, which will be shown during lunch, and to visit the Holocaust Museum in Glen Cove and the Holocaust Museum in Washington, where she's on a much longer tape presentation. I close with the words that Annie Bleiberg often did, Am Yisrael Chai. Thank you.
I, too, have really wonderful memories of Annie, and I loved her very, very much, and she lives on in my heart always. And I do want to share her story to my children and to the kids in the Hebrew school, and I feel it's so important that her short story is shared, so thank you. The music from the movie Schindler's List was composed and conducted by John Williams for the 1993 movie produced and directed by Steven Spielberg, based on the nonfiction novel by Thomas Keneally. The original score features violinist Yitzhak Perlman and the Boston Symphony Orchestra. The film was designated as culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant by the Library of Congress in 2004 and selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry. This first piece is called, it's the theme from Schindler's List reprise.
Before we together turn to the words of the mourner's Kaddish, I would just like to share this meditation. We have lived in numberless towns and villages, and in too many of them we have endured cruel suffering. Some we have forgotten, others are sealed in our memory, a wound that does not heal. 100 generations of victims and martyrs, still their blood cries out from the earth, and so many at Dachau, at Buchenwald, at Baba Yar. What can we say? What can we do? How bear the unbearable or accept what life has brought to our people? All who are born must die, but how shall we compare the slow passage of time with the callous slaughter of the innocent cut off before their time? They live with faith, not all, but many. And surely many died with faith in God, in life, in the goodness that even flames cannot destroy. May we find a way to the strength of that faith, that trust, that sure sense that life and soul endure beyond this body's death. They have left their lives to us. Let a million prayers rise wherever Jews worship. Let a million candles glow against the darkness of these unfinished lives. Together we turn to the words of the mourner's Kaddish. Please stand. The words can both be found in the program, in the white program, or alternatively in the prayer books on page 294 in the pews. We say, Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbi, B'alma divrach chirutei v'yamlich machutei, B'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael, Bagala vizman kariv v'imru, Amen. Yehei shmei Rabba mevrach le'olam olmei olmaya, Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnasei, v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shmei dekudesha brichu, la'ela minko berchata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechemata, damiran bi'alma v'imru, Amen. Yehei Shlomo Rabba min Shemaya, v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru, Amen. O seh shalom b'mamav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru, Amen. May the memory of Annie Bleiberg and David Bleiberg always serve as a blessing. May the memories of all those who were slain in the Holocaust serve as a blessing to each of us. You may be seated.
Oh, say shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru, Amen. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael.
I just want to say a special word of thanks Our regular pianist, Zisel Slepovich, is recovering from COVID, and John Siskind, a member of our synagogue, stepped in the last 24 hours to help us out. So thank you, John. So may everyone stay healthy. I'd like to read a poem by Frant Abbas, who died at the age of 14 in Terezin. He writes, "I am a Jew and I will be a Jew forever. Even if I should die from hunger, never will I submit. I will always fight for my people on my honor. I will never be ashamed of them. I give my word. I am proud of my people, how dignified they are. And even if I am suppressed, I will always come back to life." The words from our high holiday liturgy, Zochrenu L'chaim, remember us for life.
Zochrenu L'chaim, Melech hafetz b'chaim. Zochrenu L'chaim, Melech hafetz b'chaim. Remember us, remember us, remember us, O God of life. Remember us, remember us, remember us, O God of life. Zochrenu L'chaim, Melech hafetz b'chaim. Zochrenu L'chaim, Melech hafetz b'chaim. Remember us, remember us, remember us, O God of life. Remember us, remember us, remember us, O God of life.
We are going to conclude with the words from a familiar show, From Fiddler on the Roof to Life, L'chaim. You can feel free to join with the words. The Cantor leads us in this beautiful song. And then when we conclude the singing of this song, we will adjourn to the garden, which is just right here on the front lawn, for just some brief words there in the dedication ceremony, and we'll sing Hatikva, Israel's national anthem, standing there in the garden. Cantor?
To life, L'chaim, 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 to life. Here's to the father I tried to be, here's to my bride to be. Drink L'chaim, to life, L'chaim, 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 to life. Life has a way of confusing us, blessing and bruising us. Drink L'chaim, to life. God would like us to be joyful, even when our hearts lie panting on the floor. But how much more can we be joyful when there's really something to be joyful for? To life, L'chaim. To Tzeitel, my daughter, my wife. It gives you something to think about, something to drink about. Drink L'chaim, to life. We'll raise a glass and sip a drop of schnapps in honor of the great good luck that favors you. We know that when good fortune favors to such men, it stands to reason we deserve it too. To us, good fortune Be happy, be healthy, long life. And if our good fortune never comes, here's to whatever comes. Drink l'chaim to